What happens when a royal who built her brand on victimhood meets a host who refuses to play along? Well, buckle up, because what unfolded on The View yesterday was absolutely explosive. We're talking about a clash so intense that it ended with Meghan Markle literally storming off set in the middle of a live broadcast. And trust me, you need to hear every single word of this train wreck. But first, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because this story is going to blow your mind. So there's Meghan Markle, sitting across from Whoopi Goldberg on The View, looking every bit the polished duchess she once was, but underneath that carefully constructed facade, you could sense the tension brewing. She'd come on the show to promote her latest venture, some wellness podcast that nobody asked for, but Whoopi had other plans. So Meghan, Whoopi began, her voice carrying that familiar no-nonsense tone. You've been very vocal about your struggles with the royal family. But I have to ask, don't you think it's time to move forward instead of constantly relitigating the past? The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Meghan's smile flickered for just a moment, a crack in her perfectly rehearsed armor. Well, Whoopi, I think it's important to speak truth to power. My experiences were real, and silencing survivors of institutional racism isn't something I'm willing to do. Survivors? Whoopi's eyebrows shot up. That's a pretty strong word for someone who married into one of the most privileged families on earth. You could practically feel the temperature in the studio drop. Meghan's jaw tightened, but she maintained that practiced composure. I think you're minimizing the very real trauma that comes from being targeted by an institution that claims to represent diversity while systematically excluding voices like mine. Hold up, Whoopi interrupted, leaning forward. You're talking about trauma, but let's be real here. You had a fairy tale wedding watched by millions. You lived in a palace, and when things got tough, you had the privilege to walk away. Most people dealing with real institutional racism don't have that luxury. The other hosts exchanged glances, sensing the brewing storm. Sunny Hostin tried to jump in with her usual diplomatic approach. I think what Meghan is saying is that even within privilege, there can be very real experiences of discrimination. But Meghan was already on the offensive. Thank you, Sunny. It's refreshing to hear from someone who understands that racism doesn't disappear just because you're in a position of visibility. In fact, it often becomes more insidious. Whoopi wasn't backing down. But here's what I don't understand. You've built an entire brand around being a victim of the royal family. Book deals, Netflix specials, podcast interviews. At what point does seeking justice become capitalizing on grievance? The accusation hit like a slap. Meghan's composure cracked further, her voice rising slightly. That's incredibly unfair. I've used my platform to highlight important issues. The fact that you're framing advocacy as opportunism says more about your perspective than mine. My perspective? Whoopi's voice sharpened. My perspective is that actions speak louder than words, and your actions have been pretty consistent. They've all been about keeping your name in the headlines by talking about how badly you were treated. Joy. Bahar, never one to miss drama, jumped in. But Whoopi, don't you think she has a right to tell her story? Of course she does, Whoopi replied, not taking her eyes off Meghan. But there's a difference between telling your story and turning it into a career. And frankly, I'm tired of hearing the same story over and over again. Meghan's mask was slipping now. You know what, Whoopi? I came here thinking I could have an honest conversation about important issues, but it's clear that you've already made up your mind about who I am and what my motivations are. I've made up my mind based on what I've seen, Whoopi shot back. And what I've seen is someone who talks a lot about service and compassion while spending most of her time settling scores. Settling scores? Meghan's voice cracked with indignation. I'm speaking about my lived experience. I'm advocating for change. If that makes you uncomfortable, maybe you should ask yourself why. The tension was palpable now. Even the usually chatty audience had gone silent, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Whoopi leaned back in her chair, studying Meghan with those sharp eyes. "You know what makes me uncomfortable?" Whoopi said slowly. "The fact that you seem to think your pain is more important than everyone else's, that your story deserves more attention than the countless people who face real discrimination without the safety net of millions of dollars and celebrity status." Meghan's hands clenched in her lap. "That's not fair, and you know it. I never said my pain was more important than anyone else's, but I refuse to be silenced just because I have a platform." "Nobody's trying to silence you," Whoopi replied, "but maybe it's time to use that platform for something other than relitigating your royal experience." The confrontation was reaching a boiling point, and everyone in the studio could feel it. Meghan's breathing had quickened, her carefully constructed, public persona crumbling under Whoopi's relentless questioning. "You don't get to tell me how to use my voice," Meghan said, her tone now openly hostile. "And frankly, I'm shocked that someone in your position would try to police how a woman of color processes and shares her trauma." "Oh, we're playing the race card now?" Whoopi's voice carried a dangerous edge. "Because that's exactly what I'm talking about. Every time someone challenges you, every time someone asks a tough question, you hide behind your identity instead of engaging with the actual issue." The studio fell completely silent. Even the crew members had stopped what they were doing to watch this explosive confrontation unfold. Meghan's face had gone pale, her hands trembling slightly as she processed what Whoopi had just said. "How dare you?" Meghan whispered, her voice barely audible but dripping with venom. "How dare you minimize my experience and then accuse me of weaponizing my identity?" "I'm not minimizing anything," Whoopi replied calmly. "I'm asking you to take responsibility for your actions instead of blaming everything on other people." The battle lines were drawn, and it was clear that neither woman was backing down. What had started as a routine interview had devolved into something much more personal, much more dangerous. Meghan straightened in her chair, her eyes flashing with barely contained fury. "Responsibility for my actions? What exactly should I be taking responsibility for? Speaking my truth? Refusing to stay silent about institutional racism?" "Your truth," Whoopi repeated, emphasizing each word. "See, that's the problem right there. You keep talking about your truth like it's the only version that matters. But what about Harry's family's truth? What about the staff members you've thrown under the bus? Don't their truths count? The staff members?" Meghan's laugh was bitter and cold. "You mean the same people who leaked private conversations to the tabloids? Who created a hostile work environment and then played victim when I called them out?" Sarah Haynes, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. "But Meghan, multiple reports have suggested that you were difficult to work with, that you made unreasonable demands and created tension within the household." Meghan whipped around, to face Sarah, her composure completely gone now. "Difficult? Is that what we're calling it when a woman of color refuses to accept substandard treatment? When she advocates for herself and her team?" "No," Whoopi interjected firmly. "That's what we call it when someone throws tantrums and then blames everyone else when people don't want to work with them anymore." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Meghan's face contorted with rage, her carefully maintained royal demeanor evaporating completely. "Tantrums? You think advocating for basic human decency is throwing tantrums? I think demanding that people change century-old protocols because they don't suit your preferences might qualify," Whoopi replied coolly. "And I think publicly humiliating your in-laws on international television definitely qualifies." "Humiliating?" Meghan's voice rose to a near shriek. "I shared my experience. I talked about how isolated and unsupported I felt. How is that humiliation? Because you did it for money," Whoopi said bluntly. "You sat down with Oprah, made explosive accusations about racism and neglect, and got paid millions of dollars for it. That's not sharing your experience. That's selling your family out. The other hosts looked uncomfortable now, realizing they were witnessing something far more intense than their usual political debates. Alyssa Farah Griffin tried to moderate. I think both perspectives here have validity. Maybe we can find some common ground. No, Meghan snapped, turning on Alyssa with unexpected venom. There's no common ground with people who refuse to acknowledge the reality of what I went through. I was suicidal. I was trapped. I had no support system. You had Harry, Whoopi pointed out. You had his family initially. You had more resources than most people could dream of. But instead of working within the system to create change, you burned it all down and then played victim. Played victim? Meghan was on her feet now, her voice echoing through the studio. I was a victim. I was targeted by a racist institution and a hostile media environment that wanted to see me fail from day one. The media that made you a global superstar? Whoopi challenged. The same media that covered your wedding like a fairy tale? The media only turned on you after you started attacking everyone around you. That's not true and you know it, Meghan shot back. The coverage was hostile from the beginning. They criticized everything I did, everything I wore, everything I said. They treated me completely differently than they treated Kate. Joy Behar, sensing an opportunity to pile on, jumped in. But maybe some of that criticism was warranted. I mean, you did seem to have a lot of demands right from the start. Meghan turned on Joy with laser focus. Demands? Like wanting to use my voice for causes I care about? Like expecting basic respect and support from my husband's family? Like wanting to commercialize your royal title, Whoopi said quietly. Like planning your exit strategy before you even gave the role a real chance. The accusation hit Meghan like a physical blow. Her face went white, then flushed red with fury. That's a lie. That's a complete fabrication designed to make me look calculating and opportunistic. Is it though? Whoopi pressed. Because the timeline suggests otherwise. You were already in talks with agents and producers before you even moved to England full-time. You were already planning your post-royal career. I was exploring options, Meghan admitted through gritted teeth, because I knew the institution would never allow me to be myself or use my platform effectively. Or because you knew you could make more money as a celebrity victim than as a working royal, Whoopi countered. The studio erupted. Meghan was shaking now, her hands clenched, into fists at her sides. How dare you question my motivations? How dare you sit there and psychoanalyze my decisions like you know anything about what I went through? I know what I see, Whoopi replied calmly. And what I see is someone who's made a career out of grievance and expects everyone to applaud her for it. A career out of grievance? Meghan's voice was shrill now, all pretense of royal composure abandoned. I've used my platform to advocate for women's rights, for racial justice, for mental health awareness. I've tried to make a positive difference in the world. By constantly talking about yourself, Whoopi shot back. Every cause you champion somehow becomes about your own struggles. Every platform you use becomes a vehicle for relitigating your royal experience. Sunny Hostin tried once more to de-escalate. I think we need to take a breath here and recognize that trauma affects people differently. But Meghan was beyond reason now. Don't patronize me, Sunny. And don't let her gaslight me into thinking that speaking about institutional racism is somehow selfish or opportunistic. Nobody's gaslighting you, Whoopi said firmly. But maybe it's time to admit that not everything that happened to you was about racism. Maybe some of it was about your behavior and your choices. My behavior? Meghan was practically screaming now. What behavior? Being confident? Having opinions? Refusing to be diminished? Alienating staff members, Whoopi ticked off on her fingers. Making impossible demands, throwing people under the bus when things didn't go your way, publicly attacking. Your family for money. Stop, Meghan commanded, her voice cracking. Just stop. You don't know what you're talking about. You weren't there. You didn't live through what I lived through. You're right, Whoopi agreed. I wasn't there. But I've been watching, and what I've seen is a pattern of behavior that suggests the problem might not be everyone else. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Meghan stood frozen, her chest heaving, her eyes wild with a mixture of rage and something that looked almost like panic. The other hosts sat in stunned silence, realizing they had witnessed something unprecedented. "You know what?" Meghan finally whispered, her voice trembling with barely controlled fury. "I came here in good faith, thinking I could have an honest conversation. But this is exactly the kind of hostile environment that forced me out of the royal family in the first place." "The only hostility here," Whoopi replied evenly, "is coming from you." The accusation struck Meghan like lightning. Her entire body went rigid, her face cycling through emotions so quickly it was almost dizzying to watch. Rage, disbelief, humiliation, and something darker flickered across her features before settling into cold fury. "Hostile environment?" Meghan repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "You think I'm creating a hostile environment by defending myself against your baseless attacks? I think you're creating a hostile environment by refusing to engage with legitimate criticism," Whoopi replied steadily. "Every time someone challenges your narrative, you either play the victim or go on the attack. There's no middle ground with you." "Legitimate criticism?" Meghan's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Is that what you call character assassination? Because that's what this is. You've decided I'm the villain in this story and nothing I say will change your mind." "I haven't decided anything," Whoopi countered. "I'm basing my opinions on your actions, and your actions have been consistently self-serving." "Self-serving?" Meghan was pacing now, her movements sharp and agitated. "Everything I've done has been about service, about using my platform to create positive change in the world." "Your platform," Whoopi emphasized. "That's all you ever talk about. Your platform, your voice, your truth, your trauma. When do we get to hear about anyone else?" The observation hit home. Meghan stopped pacing, her eyes narrowing dangerously. "You want to hear about someone else? Let's talk about you, Whoopi. Let's talk about how you've spent this entire interview trying to tear down a woman who's already been through hell." "I'm trying to have an honest conversation," Whoopi replied calmly. "Something you seem incapable of." "Honest conversation?" Meghan's voice rose again. "You've been hostile from the moment I sat down. You've questioned my motives, my integrity, my experiences, and now you have the audacity to claim I'm the problem?" Sarah Haynes made one last attempt at diplomacy. "Maybe we can agree that both the royal family and Meghan could have handled things better." "No," Meghan snapped, whirling around to face Sarah. "I won't accept false equivalencies. I was the one who was isolated, who was denied help when I needed it most, who was thrown to the wolves by an institution that claimed to protect me. You were also the one who signed lucrative media deals while still carrying a royal title," Whoopi pointed out. "You were the one who aired private family conversations for public consumption. You were the one who made accusation after accusation without providing any concrete evidence." "Evidence?" Meghan's voice cracked. "You want evidence of racism? Of institutional bias? Look at how I was treated compared to other members of the family. Look at the different standards, the different expectations. I'm looking at someone who expected special treatment and threw a tantrum when she didn't get it," Whoopi replied bluntly. The words hit Meghan like a physical blow. She stumbled slightly, catching herself on the back of her chair. For a moment, just a moment, her mask slipped completely and something raw and desperate flickered across her face. "Special treatment?" she whispered. Then her voice rose to a shout. "I asked for basic human decency. I asked for support during the most difficult period of my life. I asked to be treated like a human being instead of a prop. And when you didn't get exactly what you wanted, you burned everything down." Whoopi said quietly, "You hurt people who cared about you. You damaged relationships that could have been repaired. You chose destruction over dialogue. I chose survival, Meghan shot back, tears of rage streaming down her face now. I chose my mental health and my family's safety over an institution that was killing me slowly. You chose your bank account, Whoopi replied without hesitation. You chose fame and fortune over family and duty. The studio went dead silent. Even the cameras seemed to stop rolling, though they hadn't. Meghan stood frozen, her face a mask of pure fury and humiliation. Her hands were shaking, her breathing ragged. "How dare you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible but carrying more venom than any scream. "How dare you sit there and judge me? You have no idea what I sacrificed, what I endured, what I lost." "What you lost?" Whoopi's voice was incredulous. "You lost nothing. You gained everything. A title, a platform, global recognition. And when that wasn't enough, you monetized your complaints and became even richer and more famous." "I lost my privacy," Meghan screamed. "I lost my sense of self. I lost relationships with people I cared about. I lost my connection to my own family." "You traded all of that for something you wanted more," Whoopi said simply. "And now you want everyone to feel sorry for you about it." The words hung in the air like a final judgment. Meghan stood there, shaking with rage, tears streaming down her face, looking more vulnerable and human than she had in years. But instead of eliciting sympathy, her breakdown only seemed to confirm Whoopi's assessment. "You know what?" Meghan said finally, her voice eerily calm now. "I don't have to sit here and listen to this. I don't have to subject myself to this kind of treatment." "No, you don't," Whoopi agreed. "But running away when things get uncomfortable is exactly what I'm talking about." "I'm not running away," Meghan snapped, grabbing her purse from beside her chair. "I'm choosing not to engage with someone who's determined to mischaracterize everything I say and do." "I'm characterizing you based on your actions," Whoopi replied. "And right now, you're proving my point perfectly." Meghan turned to face the cameras, her composure completely shattered. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she said, her voice shaking. "This is the kind of hostile environment that women of color face when we try to speak our truth." "No," Whoopi said firmly. "This is what happens when anyone, regardless of color, refuses to take responsibility for their choices and their behavior." That was the final straw. Meghan's face contorted with rage and humiliation. She looked around the studio wildly as if searching for allies, but found only uncomfortable faces and averted eyes. "I'm done," she announced, her voice barely controlled. "I'm absolutely done with this charade." "Meghan, please," Joy tried weakly, but it was too late. Meghan was already moving, storming toward the exit with her purse clutched in her white-knuckled grip. But she couldn't resist one final parting shot. She turned back to the panel, her face a mask of fury and wounded pride. "You'll be hearing from my lawyers," she declared, her voice shaking with emotion. "All of you." And with that, she was gone, leaving behind only stunned silence and the echo of her heels clicking rapidly across the studio floor. The cameras continued rolling, capturing the aftermath of what would undoubtedly become one of the most talked-about television moments in recent memory. Whoopi sat back in her chair, completely unfazed by the threat. "Well," she said to the remaining panel, "I guess we know how this story ends." The other hosts looked around at each other, still processing what they had just witnessed. The audience sat in stunned silence, many of them holding their phones, having recorded what might be the most explosive television walkout in daytime television history. As the show cut to commercial, one thing was crystal clear. Meghan Markle had just shown the world exactly who she really was when her carefully constructed facade finally cracked. And it wasn't pretty. So there you have it, folks. A masterclass in what happens when someone who's built their entire brand on victimhood meets someone who refuses to buy into the narrative. Meghan Markle came onto The View expecting the usual softball treatment, but instead got a reality check that she clearly wasn't prepared for. What did you think of Whoopi's approach? Was she too harsh, or was it about time someone called Meghan out? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and make sure to subscribe for more explosive celebrity breakdowns like this one.